Today is Wednesday, November the 5th, 2014, and Joe Turner and myself, Judy Meyer, are talking to Barbara Manson. Is that your last
That
name?
is correct.
Could you spell it for us?
It's, you want the last name?
You're right.
Yes. Manson is Manson.
Okay, just wondered.
Very simple.
Right, it is.
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes names that are almost too simple, you just want to make sure.
That's right.
And Barbara, I don't really know much about you. I know I met you at a meeting a couple of months ago here at Bridgeton. So I'd like to ask you to take us back to the beginning, if you wouldn't mind telling us where you started your life, maybe where you were born, and if you wouldn't mind telling us when.
Okay. I was born in the city of St. Louis at the old St. John's Hospital. I'm 76 years old this year, so I was born in 1938, in the summer of 1938. And I originally lived most of my life in an area in the city that they call Dogtown.
Oh, of course.
Across from Forest Park.
Of course.
And my husband lived near Tar Grove. And we didn't meet until we were much older.
When you say much older, you mean like out of high school?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I met him on a blind date while I was in college, and he had just come back on leave after doing his, what do you call it, the initials.
Boot camp?
Yeah, boot camp, I guess, with the military. Yeah, and he had dropped out of college because his father had died, and he was helping his mom. He was an only child, and he decided he would drop out and help her because they had just bought a house.
They had bought a house.
Yes, yeah.
I see.
The family had bought a house, and his father passed away, and his mother was left with trying to meet mortgage payments. So, that's where we had met. And I was in my last year of college. I was ready to graduate. I just put the yearbook to bed, as they call it, and I went on a blind date with him to a basketball game. And I thought, oh well, if I don't like the state, at least I've seen a basketball game. That is so shallow.
Yeah.
I know, but there you go. That was the way it turned out.
Well, let me ask you, where did you go to school when you lived in the Dogtown area?
I went to St. James the Greater. It was the local parochial school in that area. It's still there, and it's thriving. As a community, the school is still looking for students and stuff like that. But as far as an area, it is much like it is when I remembered it. We lived in an apartment building, and as a matter of fact, the house that my husband's parents bought, we still have that house in Dogtown, and that area is so much like it was, and probably all, maybe with the exception of two of our kids have lived there at one time or another. In their growing up years, and they all, when they come into town, that's where they stay. So
let me ask you a little question. There's been a little bit of debate as to how the area got its name. What is your story on that one?
The story that I've always clung to is that there was an influx of Irish that lived in an area, I thought they call it Paddy, something to do with Paddy. But nevertheless, they were developing the area for the 1904 World's Fair. And the people that lived out in this little community, they sort of went to this community because they were working over there in the Forest Park area, which was where the World's Fair was happening. And they had a lot of dogs. Now, I know a lot of people will say that, oh no, they ate dogs. No, I've never heard that one. I've heard that, they just had a lot of, there were a lot of dogs, and it got in. That was the area where all those people with a lot of dogs lived.
Oh, okay.
And that's the story I heard.
Okay.
And as I was growing up, the priest who was the pastor at that time, he was a missionary priest from Ireland. So there was just an influx of Irish and Italians that lived in the area. I don't know how, we lived in an apartment because I'm part German, so I don't know how I got there, but I celebrated St. Patrick's Day with the best of them.
Right.
And I still see a lot of people from over there, and I go back and they still have reunions and things like that, and it's just always a lot of fun.
Well, where were you going to college?
I went to Fontaine.
And what were you majoring in?
History.
Wonderful.
That's right, yes. I went to, my high school was Xavier. It was a girls' school down on West Pine. And when I was about 15, my brother was born, and so my mother and father, my sister and myself, my baby brother, we moved out to an area it's in the Normandy area. It's a little one of those little communities they call Uplands Park.
What is it?
Uplands Park.
Uplands Park.
Yes, it's just west of Pine Lawn, and right around where Normandy and you know that area around Umsel, if you can locate that, just east of Umsel, west of Pine Lawn. It's only a few blocks.
Right.
They're very, very small.
Right.
And I lived out there until I got married. And by that time, my husband was going back to school, and we got called up. He got called up into the Berlin crisis.
Oh, really?
When they put up the wall.
What do you mean he got called for military
He got called back into the service, and we had our wedding planned for November, and we had to rearrange all of the festivities and everything to do with the wedding. We had to call it off or try to get our deposit money back and all that kind of stuff. And we moved it up to September. And so we got married on one of the warmest days in September, and I had all kinds of things that were winter. You know, it was all planned for November.
Right, sure.
Yes, it was a very nice wedding. It was just too bad that we didn't have color photography because, you know, it met all my expectations except for the day. It was just, and I was exhausted and I had lost a lot of weight because
wow.
my dress kind of hung on me.
Oh,
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
That when my daughter got married, many, many years later, she wore my wedding dress. So she had it remodeled, and she wore my wedding dress. So and that was something that I have no idea what happened to that wedding dress. I have a granddaughter now. I'm wondering if that will come out someday for her, but I don't know. That's another story.
No, that's a very nice story, and it's very nice and good memories of that. Did your husband serve then in the military during the Berlin crisis?
He was there. We were at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for a year.
So you went with him?
Yes, I did. Yes, we lived on Ocean Avenue, which was across the street from the ocean.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I used to, I would stay there in that little. We had an apartment that was in an old wooden building. It was a family home, big family home that held, like the captain and his wife lived on the first floor. We were on the second floor, and we shared that second floor with the family that was watching over the house for Mama, who lived in Newark. And then there was another military family, Army family, that they were on the third floor. So we lived there for a year.
What did you do then while your husband was?
Mostly not a whole lot. I did get a part-time job at a department store. It was called Bamberger's, which was the equivalent of a famous bar.
Okay.
And worked in the men's department during that time. But there weren't a lot of jobs at that time. And when you lived in this area and you were in something that had anything to do with the military, there were hard feelings because the people thought you were interfering with their jobs. It was an area that was mostly, it developed during the summer as a tourist location, and people like to come and vacation there. So they wanted their houses open so they could rent them out for much more in the summer. And we were interfering with that stream of income. So they didn't take too kindly to the military back and forth. They used them. They all worked at the base, but at the same time, they weren't too happy with this influx of military.
Right.
And we sat around there for a year, and there was really nothing to do. I can remember because Bill, it was a let me think of what they call that. I know what it turned out to be because he spent his time repairing television sets and things like that. So it's an electronics.
I see.
It's electronics. And that's what he specialized in.
So he never actually went overseas for
No. But I must tell you that I think, with the exception of one person in our wedding party, everybody was caught up in this call-up. A couple of people went overseas. Another one, his girlfriend at that time, she was a nurse, and she was called up. Because anybody who got their education through the military and things like that, they were, prone to be found and called up for this time. And they really didn't have a plan. 25 years later, I sat and watched Pierre Salinger and who's the Secretary of Defense? McNamara. Mm-hmm. And they sat and laughed about how they just didn't know what they were doing. And I thought, well, I know what we were doing, because there were so many people who had just come back from Korea and bought houses, and they had to find somebody to rent their house quickly to cover their mortgage so that they could show up because their paperwork hadn't been done, and they were catching up on things, and oh, it was just a mess. So where we felt inconvenienced, these people were taking a terrible hit. But by the time we came back from New Jersey, I was pregnant with our first child, and so we had to do a lot of catch up.
So you came back to St. Louis,
Yes.
and where did you live then?
Our apartment that we found was in Overland, and we stayed there for the next couple of years, and by that time we had 2 more children.
Oh my goodness.
So can I tell you, can I stop right here and tell you
Of
that
course.
my first recollection of Bridgeton?
Sure.
Okay, going back to when I was probably a preteen, I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Overland, and they had lived there for years because they had two relatives. They both lived on the same street in Overland. But this one family, my Uncle Frank and Aunt Pat, they moved to Gist Road, and they lived there for a number of years until I guess they both passed away. And that was my first. I really didn't know it was Bridgeton, but that's the first time I knew about Gist Road out there. But the other time, my father worked for American Standard, and he sold plumbing and heating supplies. And he put us in the car one afternoon, and we had to drive all the way out to this place where there was this new subdivision. And this subdivision had these houses that were a strange design, and he just couldn't understand it because he knew how you did the math and figured out how big a furnace you would need and so forth. But these houses were built on slabs, and they had glass walls. I mean, it sounded like something out of a musical where they say, this newfangled stuff. And of course, I'm in the car, and I'm in this age where I'm just bored stiff.
Yes.
But I remember him talking about the glass wall, which were sliding glass doors.
Oh.
And they had moved the houses in such a direction. It was Fisher and Frickel. And they had moved the houses in such direction, so they were really close together, but you didn't really see into their windows and stuff like that. But I mean, that was so much different from city houses or what had been construction that he was just flabbergasted. But it was the first time you'd seen the what do you call the heating when you do that?
Radiant?
Radiant heating, yes.
On the floor?
On the floors, it warmed the floors, because all my friends who had lived in Clairton, they loved it. They thought it was wonderful, but he just was not having any part of it.
Now,
He
this
had
was
to
your
grow-
father.
This was my father. So that was my first entrance into Bridgeton. That was the first time I'd ever heard about it. But it was not, to me, it still wasn't Bridgeton. It was still this subdivision that was called Carrollton, and it was built by Fisher and Frickel. And so there was a lot of building going on after World War II. And so that was my first experience with where Bridgeton was. So we had these, and I'm going to jump back to where we were, we were in Overland with these babies, and we were going to have to find a house. And we picked out this house, and it was being built right when Tim was expected. And
This is your
this
third
is the
one.
third child, yes. We had a child every year for 3 years now, so we had 3 babies, as it were. And we found this house in St. James Estates. And the first house we thought would be up on Lockport, which is on the cul-de-sac. But we wanted the walkout basement, and this one sort of dropped off at the back, so we know that. And it was cleared. There was nothing there. They'd taken out all the trees. It was just dirt as far as you could see, and little paths of streets and stuff like that. So we chose this lot on Swift.
Swift.
And there may have been 4 other families that had houses by the time we moved in on Swift. Fuller had not developed yet. The house on the cul-de-sac, that was on Fuller. And but these were all just plot map. You picked out lots from the plot map. Nothing was built yet. And the display houses were right there as you come down from St. Gerard Park.
What's the difference between St. James Estates and St. Gerard Park?
Probably the design of the houses are one thing. St.
Would-
Gerard had been there for a while.
Were they both by the same builder?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, and I'm
Okay.
trying to, if I thought about it a long time, I could probably come up with the name of the builder, but I cannot remember.
That's all right.
Except that St. Gerard Park had this grotto Have you lived here long enough to remember St. Gerard Park when it had the grotto? And, you know, you pulled in Magella, and there was a little sort of a round shape, and they had this tree that was really low, so they must have built up the ground a lot to be so much higher than that tree. And they had like a brick wall that was around it, a slight brick wall, but so many people ran into that brick wall. And, you know, they finally took out, I'm sure that the tree's roots had to have been long gone. And they finally took out that tree and they paved over it, which was much better for the people who lived around there because, you know, it was just horrendous trying to find parking and stuff like that. So it was a good thing that they did that.
So you picked out your house, which really wasn't built yet.
No.
Well, were
No.
there different designs, floor plans,
Sure.
sizes you could pick from?
Sure. We chose this house that was called a split foyer.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to the others that
Ranch?
were ranch.
Mhm.
And there was a couple different kinds of split foyers, a couple different kinds of ranch. I think the price range went from 14 something to 16 something.
14,000.
Thousand, yes.
14,000.
Try to wrap your mind around that. I mean, that
14,000.
yes, right, yeah.
What year was it?
This should have been 1964. And
14,000.
the houses were built by Frank Zyken.
Zyken with the
That's
Z.
The Z, yes, yeah, that was a connection to the trash hauler
Yes.
business, okay.
Yes.
So, and that was interesting, that was another story altogether, but that should be said off camera.
Okay.
You know, and I'm thinking that maybe Scotch had been built, and there was just a few houses on Tideland, which was where the display houses were. And we moved in there the day after Christmas. We were supposed to be in there before Christmas, so my parents and the kids, we all took all the presents and things like that into this empty house and opened presents there, you know, and then, you know, the day after Christmas, friends of my husband helped to move us in, and it was just a sea of mud outside. They did not come and put down sod until the spring. It was just, and it was really something we learned, you know, on the go, that when you sign contracts and they put in the heating, that your air conditioning is hooked into that contract. So if your compressor blows outside for your air conditioning, but that compressor hasn't been put in until the following spring, that span of time when the furnace goes in and that compressor gets put in, that's kind of a no man's land. It wasn't covered by warranty because our air conditioner blew, you know, the following year. It lasted like a year and it blew. And it's, this isn't covered, you know, because your warranty, you know, went with your furnace, but they hadn't completed it yet. So, I mean, you know, we were novices.
Right, and I'm sure many people are with their first house. But what led you to St. James Estates? Do you know? Was there anything in particular?
Sure, Bill was, well, it was the location. Okay, it was a real estate location. He was working for Western Electric, and he worked in various areas. He never knew where the next job contract was going to be. His kind of job was that, all the cable that goes into telephone offices and large buildings where they have switchboards, et cetera, and all of those things have to be wired. And so that was the kind of job that he did. He started off, laying cable, but he had, came up and he was doing the wiring, and so it was close to Highway 70. It was close to Lambert. There was no Highway 270. So he had access, and we were like between both families. So we had, we were, equally distanced between the families, we thought. And he could use the highways to get back and forth to work, and we only had one car.
I was going to ask you about that.
That's right, only one car. That was quite a thing, because I would have to get up and get the babies all ready to go in the morning, take him to work, and we would, if I had like a doctor appointment and things like that, and I would, drop kids off at my mom's house because my mother-in-law was employed, and you know, and then in the afternoon, I'd have to pile the kids in the car and go back and pick him up wherever he was located, and you know, and then drive back home. It was exhausting. So you know, when I think of some people that complain today, I think you have no idea. You have no idea. We were driving a Volkswagen at that time. I never did like that car.
A Volkswagen?
Volkswagen, the Beetle.
A Beetle
Yes,
with
you try to put three babies in a back seat and try to find room for groceries. Try it sometime and see how that works.
but good, economically good.
Well, he said so, but he didn't realize that I was not comfortable driving a stick shift, and he couldn't understand why we were having all these bills. You know, and I said my knee always wobbles, and so I'm always killing the motor, and so I would, you know, and he picked it up one day that I would drive into parking lots and drive around until lights changed, so I could not have to stop the car.
Oh, wow.
And it was just, it was the way I pulled myself out of that complication. But it was like, I said, well, you had to have a stick shift. You were going to find it economical. But for me, no.
I see.
Well, he did buy one more stick shift, but I never drove that car. But, it was one of the things that it was like, if you'd have asked me, I would have told you, but you went and you bought it.
Well, when did you, hopefully, when did you get your second car that you had access to a car? Hopefully one came along.
It was a station wagon. And it was a few years later, and I was delighted with that car because that was the car that gave me access to being able to get the kids in the car and load it up with groceries or whatever the big things that you lugged around, because we had a standing joke among families at that time. All of our friends were buying houses and stuff like that, and we said, nobody tells you that it's going to cost you more than the monthly mortgage. What you find out is every Friday when you get a paycheck, you take it to Central Hardware or over to Sears or something like that, and you just open your wallet up and say, here, take it, because you always need something for the lawn or some tool or something that you didn't plan on. And, and I can remember one friend of ours, he had been in school for such a long time, and he finally bought a house, and he says, I do not remember my father putting down fertilizer. I just cannot remember all of those things that we're supposed to be putting down, today, that's supposed to help grass grow and stuff like that. My dad never did that. So we used to have a lot of jokes about that among ourselves, that, all of that was costing us so much more. And it was like, you don't factor that in to buying a house.
Well, I think, a lot of new homeowners are just intent on having just the nicest yard as well as house
There's
indoors.
always one man in the neighborhood.
Yeah, right.
It was that old Scott's, I think it was Scott's commercial that used to talk about that. We always picked out who the one man was in the neighborhood. He had the greenest lawn and grass.
Yeah. When your children got old enough, what school did they start going to?
They started off going to the Pattonville Grade School.
Was that the name of it?
Pattonville
Grade School?
School is on the other side of Highway 70 at Fifi, which was across from the, I'm trying to remember what the Fry Wagner had their moving company there, and right next to Fry Wagner was the old City Hall.
City Hall.
That was the Bridgeton City Hall. It was a little house, and that's where the council people, that's where I probably went to my first council meeting.
Really?
Yes.
And that's in the area where the city garage is now?
That is, okay. Exactly, right across the street from it. And I don't know what the building, the grade school building is still there, which was next to the old fire station. It was on the other side.
Isn't that the Vantage Credit Union?
Is that what they call it now? I'm trying to remember.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yes. But that was the grade school, and then the kids went through Pattonville Grade School. I did my time as room mother, PTA president, and followed through on those jobs.
How many classrooms were in that building?
Oh my goodness.
Was there one for each grade?
I think there were probably 2 classes for each grade.
Okay.
Like they
I
might
don't
have had
remember more
first
than
and
2.
second together?
No. I remember there, Miss Dickerson had the kindergarten class, but I don't really remember. She had a morning class, I guess, and an afternoon class. And then you went into the first grade, and I think there were 2 first grades, if I recall. And it was just, and Mr. Teeter was the principal. And he had
what
been there
was the
such a
top?
long time that some of the people who were parents, you know, in the subdivision, they had gone to school, and Mr. Teeter was
Wow.
the principal there as well. So, I mean, they were scared to death of Mr. Teeter.
What was the highest grade in that building?
6th grade.
6th, okay.
Yeah, yes. And then you transferred, in our area, you would transfer over to Holman,
Okay.
which was, and then they called it junior high school, they call it middle school today.
Was that where it is now,
Yes.
across from
Yes.
what was
But they were
Northwest
still- Yes,
Plaza?
and they were still in the old building.
When you, so when you first moved out there to St. James Estates, was the Northwest Plaza
No,
built yet?
no.
What was there?
As far as I remember, it was open land. There was an old house that was part of the, what is it called, the Erastus Post House,
Yeah.
maybe, by that
Uh-huh.
location. And on the edge of our subdivision, there was another old house, which was within that same family. I can't put a name on what that house was, but that was near and dear to Doris Berrezzini's plan.
Right,
And that was just
Long, maybe?
oh, was it the Long? Okay.
Sally
okay.
Post Long?
Well, that sounds right. That's right. You know, it goes in keeping with Long Road.
Right,
Down
and
there.
she
You're
was
right.
the
You're
one
right.
that owned the land
That's
where
right.
much of
That's
the
right.
community center is now.
Well, and Frank Zykan owned that property. And there was always squabbles quarrels back and forth with zoning and things like that. Because when we looked at the plot map when we went in there was supposed to be a road. Magella was supposed to run through to Fifi. And there was supposed to be more houses that were supposed to go up on that area where the highway is now. And that would give another street exiting out, and we would have access to the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
It was really very annoying and scary, because if you had any kind of an emergency, the fire department, the engines had to come all the way over from Fifi Road, over Fifi to Natural Bridge, come over Natural Bridge and come in the subdivision by way of St. Gerard Park. And we were never getting it. He had to have bought something there, I guess it was on the edge of the Mosley property, which was a great big open field. And then next to that, I guess, was what they call the Bridgeton Commons.
Down by St. Mary's?
It was more that big field that ran as you went towards St. Mary's. Down Natural Bridge, right in that area. There was like a wedge there that Fifi went one way and Natural Bridge went the other way. And but he should have, the plan was that he should have bought some property that would give an access road up to Fifi Road, so that would have been better for the, emergency vehicles to be able to come in.
And we have talked to some people on these interviews who have had fires in their homes.
Oh my, yeah,
So
yeah.
you were fortunate.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were all fortunate that nothing of disaster ever happened, because we were always worried about that. That was when you buy a house and you see the plan, you think that's the promise that's going to be. And he would come up with new streets, and every street it was really kind of funny, because we found out that every street he would dissolve the corporation on that street, and then he'd create another corporation for the next street, and that's because of litigation. I mean, it was just, it got to be a joke. I mean, after a while, but he came one time with his zoning papers, and he wanted to put up apartments along that area that goes up towards Fifi, and he didn't get his zoning, and you probably have heard this story, okay, because. Have you had any talk about Doris Berrezzini? Because she was like how would you say it? What's the phrase you want to use? A presence to be
Reckoned with.
reckoned with. Exactly, that's the phrase I would say. And she's had more energy than anybody I've ever known, and a plan. I mean, she really wanted to see this through. But there was that house there that was on, called the Long House, okay? And Mr. Zyken had that property, and he didn't get his zoning. And came through there one day, and there he had put a load of pigs. He had a
Real
fenced around,
pigs?
but yes, indeed, they were real pigs, And I can remember Doris telling me, I went to him and I said, now, if you intend to tear the house down, please, oh please, let us come in there and just take some things, artifacts from the house and some things, so that we'll have some history of the house. And she went to work that morning and she came home that night and he had torn the house down.
Oh, wow.
So, he did not win a lot of friends.
Oh
either,
my.
so.
Wow.
It was
Did
not-
he live in the area?
No, but his daughter did.
Oh.
His daughter had bought a house up on that cul-de-sac that I talked about on Fuller.
Uh-huh.
And, she was a lovely lady, and her husband was wonderful. They had nice kids and stuff like that. But, it was not a happy place for her to be because, people were having trouble with their foundations of their houses and things like that. And there was just, all of this arguments back and forth to come and fix this, and finish this, and do this and stuff. And the streets were not, the concrete recipe, would you call it that, was not good. And so the streets were crumbling and stuff like that, and there was a lot of arguments about that, trying to going through Bridgeton and get that taken care of it was complicated.
Where do you think the name came from? You said Swift, right?
Yes, I don't know, because, think of that, Tideland, Fuller, Lockport, Swift. I have no, I don't know where they, where he picked up on those names.
Okay, I was just
I've
wondering.
never
Mm-hmm.
pulled that out. It's the same way with St. Gerard. The names in St. Gerard don't ring any bells. But one of the things that I did after we moved in there and saw that, people were always arguing, I guess. That's not the right word.
Talking?
But they're complaints, I guess. Let's put it this way. They're complaints over the back fence. And it was like, what good is this doing us complaining to each other over the back fence about, well, he hasn't done this and we haven't gotten that and what's going on with Bridgeton and blah, 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 blah. Why don't we start a homeowners association? So one morning I invited a few ladies that lived in the area over for coffee. And I'll bet if I go through that house someday and really go through it well and I'll probably find my old notes that I used because I gave them my vision of what I thought, where I wanted to live. And I thought we should have good schools, we would have, the churches would be there, but I wanted a good shopping area. I wanted a library. I wanted medical facilities. And the transportation would be good. It had us all envisioned in my mind because people who were on council at that time would say, at least this one gentleman I remember specifically said, well, just look at St. Anne's. And I said, yes, I have looked at St. Anne's. That's why I'm saying to you, that we need these things to change, because if you drive up and down St. Charles Rock Road in St. Anne's, tell me where you go to park. Tell me where, when you want to shop, where do you stop and where do you put your car? Because it's congested. Do you want that for Bridgeton? Think about it, And so I would have, my discussions with them all the time. So we started a homeowners association, and I was president of the homeowners association. And once a year we would have a block party. And we would all get out, and people from St. Gerard Park would come and, we'd all get together and put up our music and stuff like that, and have drinks and sit out and eat and talk to one another and get to know one another. And that was a way of communicating. It was a way of communicating, actually, because when there was something that was going to come up that would involve us, we'd put out at the mailboxes, we'd put a little flyer on the mailbox that there was going to be a meeting and we were going to talk about this. And so the reason the gentleman did not get his zoning is because we put out a I'm lost losing the word. When you sign a petition, you put out a petition and said, no, we don't think this is a good place to put apartments. This is just not not the adequate spot.
But Bridgeton did have a city government at that point.
Oh yeah.
Because you had a city hall.
We had a city hall, but it was still.
It was not. I'm
not certain about this. Don't take this as gospel truth. But it was a village of Bridgeton And then I thought it was maybe what would you call it, a third-class city? And they had a vote, and it became I'm going to say a first-class city. In other words, it rose in its classification so that it would become a full city, recognized as a full city. And that happened, Doris Berrezzini again, she was on that commission. And it went on that there was some complication with the mayor, who at that time was Earl Davis. And he was the one that called me up one night. I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody was playing a joke on me, and asked me to be on the Personnel Commission. And so I was on the first Personnel Commission. And that's where I met Nancy Rodegas, who had been on that Bridgeton Commission for the city. I can't remember what it was, Charter Commission. I think it was called a Charter Commission. And Opal Vest. And they lived over in the Carrollton area. And there was Dr. Blake, who was the head of the children's home. And we were on that Personnel Commission. And somewhere along that line, that was where the Bridgeton Historical Commission was set up with that charter. That was part of that charter. And Doris Berrezzini was the chair of that particular group. And
Was it called the Bridgeton Historical Commission?
as I recall, it was, yes. And that had that book, that original book. Who was it? That was Carl Banker was on that, and there was one of the Brannicky. I never remember her name. I have to look at the book to remember her name. But she lived on Carmel Court, and it was soon after that there was a notice put out that there was going to be a meeting down at the Holiday Inn, which was on Lambert, and it was about forming a historical society. Well, they were going to call it the Friends of the Historical Commission, and they passed around different, a sheet of paper, put down what you're interested in, and I put down that I was interested in oral history. And I got a hold of the other people that were on this, and I became the chair of the Oral History Committee. And there was Bob Bader, who lived on Benedetto. I think his name was Larry Hollenberg, who lived over in Carrollton. June, I don't remember her name. Interesting lady. And we went around and tried to do some oral history. And we also, Bob Bader and myself went down for many evenings we'd spend down there at the library, because the library then was down in St. Anne's. And the books that you could get on history of the area were on the reference shelf. So we had to sit in the library and look through books and try to pick out what, background on Bridgeton. Mm-hmm. And I remember one Saturday afternoon, Larry got one of his relatives who lived up in the area around where Spanish Village is.
They lived on Firster Lane.
Right, okay. And the old Mr. Hollenberg, who was very skeptical of anybody who was younger and knew that he didn't know, because I'm sure there were speculators who came around looking for land and stuff like that. So the people that were older, they were really, very cautious. But we went out with him and we were asking him questions, and I can remember it. I want to tell you the story because I always love to tell it. We were driving down in the Bottoms area, and I'm thinking it was one of us in the car, it was probably Larry, said, look at that building that's out there in the middle of that field. Looks like a little brick house, a little brick building. What the world is that? And the man, he just looked at him like he had rocks in his head. He was just like, I can't believe you're that stupid. And, and he proceeded to tell us that was an ice house.
Oh.
What the world is an ice house? Well, he said, ice is created by the river, and that's where you put your meat and your perishables and things like that. And over the summer, that's where you keep things cold. You have refrigeration. What's it doing out in the middle of that field? Was the next question. And he said, do you think the river always ran where it does today? Oh. So whenever there would be a flood, the river would take a different direction and stuff like that. So, when you look at things, we wondered why we had so much trouble with our streets and stuff like that in the subdivision. Well, there were underground springs.
Uh-huh.
And that river had made pathways, so there were things that were running underground that caused great soil for the area, for farming and stuff like that, but you never knew where one of those springs were gonna pop up. There was a family that lived around the corner from us on Magella that tried to put an in-ground pool in, and every time they tried to sink the pool into the ground, it would pop up.
Oh my.
I can remember Bob Shipley saying how many loads of sand they put in there trying to hold that thing down. I mean, he could laugh about it later. He didn't laugh about it at the time, but
right.
It was one of those things that we could laugh about later. But the kids went to Holman. I'm jumping back again. But the kids went to Holman through junior high, and when they got to 9th grade, the first boy, he went over to DeSmet. And then as Carolyn went through, and Carolyn and Tim were both on student council at Holman. And when Carolyn became 9th grade, she went on to Incarnate Word. Tim became 9th grade, he went on to DeSmet. So then I got involved with DeSmet and somewhat with Incarnate Word, driving carpools, and that was kind of my life. I kind of decided early on that in order to go to work, it would have cost us more to go to work, for me to go to work than it would be to stay at home with the kids. So I was kind of a stay-at-home mom, had part-time jobs off and on during those years.
That's a lot of driving.
It was. I can remember one day that I turned the car on. By this time there was a Highway 270, and I turned the car, and I was halfway to Page maybe before I realized that that's not where I wanted to go, because just recently I had made 5 trips to DeSmet, driving carpool and coming back and getting the kids that weren't in sports, going back, getting my kid who was in sports, and taking him home, and then taking him back for some kind of a dance that night. I mean, it was like 5 trips that one day. I remember making that, but I remember I thought to myself, my goodness, this car is on automatic. It just automatically goes in the direction of DeSmet.
So can you recreate your actual route from this area to Incarnate Word?
Oh, well, and by the time I picked up everybody, because
That's down
girls,
near
right near
almost
Umsel.
a Grand, right?
Right? No,
No,
right,
Umsel.
no, not right near Umsel. Incarnate Word is trying to think of the streets. Back in there around where in Normandy.
So,
in
but that's
Normandy
not a high
area.
school, then that's.
It's a girls' school, academy, Incarnate Word Academy
Okay.
for girls. I mean, it had been there for a long, long time.
And your daughter graduated from there.
Yes.
And both boys graduated from
From
DeSmet.
DeSmet.
And did any of your children then go on to college?
Oh, they sure did. Yes, we had 3 in college at one time.
Oh my gosh, wow.
All of them at one time were down at Mizzou, in Columbia, and Carolyn came back and graduated from UMSL. Bill and Tim both graduated from Mizzou, and then Bill went on to Kansas City and got a law degree. Tim went back to Mizzou for medical school, and then he went on to North Carolina because he went to his Duke Fayetteville for his, that's where they had their family practice teaching by way of Duke University. And Carolyn, after she graduated, she worked up here at the community center.
Really?
She was she had been a co-manager of the pool for a number of years. They had all had gotten their lifeguard badges and stuff like that. The oldest boy, he worked for the park department during the summer. Came down with poison ivy for a year. But I used to tell him, I said, Bill, I said, remember how hard it is working here at the park department, and you're getting this poison ivy, and you know what this is like, and just think when you're studying next year that you could be doing this for the rest of your life. And I just bet you'll be able to study for another 45 minutes at least. You know, and you know, to this day, he hires somebody to cut the grass and stuff. He just hates doing that.
Yeah.
But Bill worked at Malvern Nursery, which was one of the
Where was that located?
That was, well, you know where the Holiday Inn is?
On Lambert.
At Lindbergh, there where the wedge where you come around, and you used to be able to go up Long Road to get up to Fifi Road. But it was right in that vicinity. And both of the boys at one time worked at Malvern. One of the boys worked down, there was a pancake house. Tim, he wasn't 16 yet. He was riding his bicycle and worked nights at Pancake House washing dishes. Have you ever smelled pants that have been around like that kind of dishwater? And you had to have white pants. You could stand those things up in the middle of the room because they were so stiff with all of the stuff that he was doing. But again, I think this is funny myself, but you may not, but I do. But he got advanced over that summer period, and he was like a short order cook. And so he would come home in the morning, because he was on nights, he was a short order cook at nights. And he was learning how to make pancakes and waffles and whatever it is. And he would spell out his name, Tim, and pancake batter and stuff like that. And he was using all kinds of eggs, and I was gaining weight. And Tim, oh my gosh, he was really very good at it, But then they put him on days, And one night he says, I'm leaving about 20 minutes early tonight. Oh, what for? Well, they're putting me on entrees. And I said, oh my goodness, do the people know that are coming into that restaurant tonight that the person cooking their meal had 20 minutes learning what the entrees were. But he learned that, and all the boys became very good cooks. I mean, they really, and they were really hard workers, good workers. Carolyn, she was in that first round of soccer players for girls soccer. They didn't have girls soccer, and all the kids played for St. Mary's. My husband had gone to night school after he got out of the service and got away from that. He went for several years going to night school. He'd go away in the morning and take a lunch and dinner with him. I'd fix that, and he would go on over to Washington University until he got his degree. And his young Bill's kindergarten teacher wondered why young Bill was so involved with learning his letters and stuff like that. He was like intense upon that, and I said, well, his dad is going to night school, and he tells the kids that he's doing this so he can make money for them, and so he has to learn and stuff like that. So this oldest one, he was in kindergarten and not playing. He was intent on learning the letters that were on the floor and things like that. And she said, well, that's where that comes from, that he was just wound up in that. But Carolyn, I'm going to jump back there. She played soccer. Actually, Carolyn went on to play soccer with St. Blaise, and it was a traveling girls team. It was one of the few that there were at that time. That was the beginning of it. And she played for Jerry Levinsky's team, and there were a lot of girls that were from Incarnate Word. And when she was 14, they took the team over to Finland and Sweden.
Wow.
And played soccer.
Oh
so
my.
She was 14 years old when she first got her passport and traveled.
Wow.
So that was it. And she learned how to travel. They went to Denver, they went to Dallas, they went to Minnesota, places like that, and traveled. And it was really quite a wonderful experience. This is the daughter who just came back from Australia. I mean, I'm saying that, but let me go on. She was managing the pool, and one of the lifeguards became her husband. And so today they live in Florida, and he's a radiologist.
Oh, wow.
And she kind of influenced him to go to medical school. And his family actually at one time, he was a military brat, and his family had lived in St. James some of the time that his father was stationed over at, I guess it was over at Scott. But they had been moved around to Oklahoma and back and forth and things, and to Washington, D.C. and stuff like that. So he had traveled around. But Carolyn kind of influenced him to at least try out for medical school. He went to medical school, and he's a nuclear physician today.
My goodness. Wow.
So What else do you want to know?
Well,
I've been looking at it
let's
for
get
years.
back to you as your kids
Right.
were
Yeah,
going
we have
to,
about 10 minutes left.
were,
Okay.
as your children then were in college and they were getting on with your careers, what were you doing?
I was doing mostly volunteer work.
With who? For who?
Well, as I said, I'd gone through the school system and done, and did a lot of stuff over with the Pattonville School District when they needed somebody to go to seminars and stuff like that. I used to be available. I joined the Bridgeton Historical, which became the Bridgeton Historical Society. That's another story right there. Because my husband was on the board. We had some good friends, Frank and Sue Leahy. They were on the board, one time or another. And we got to talking about, it seemed like what they really wanted was somebody who was a fundraiser. They wanted a fundraiser group, and that's why I got called the Friends of the Historical Commission. And it was like, gee, we're not doing anything because they can't really decide what they're going to do with this house up here. And it was like they wanted authentic. Everything had to be authentic, and we started sitting around, and I was trying to talk with the people that were on the oral history committee. The lady's name was June Crohan that was on it, and she says, well, why can't we do this ourselves? And I said, I don't know. I said, they don't seem to be following this, but we can present it in a meeting and see if they will let us do some of the labor. And so we went up here to the Payne Gentry house and got involved with tearing down, and cleaning up and doing all the stuff with and trying to get the $40,000 that were needed to put a new roof on the house because it was leaking. And
Well, since you were with the Payne Gentry house on the ground floor,
it was a charter.
can you
Charter
tell
house.
us about, because Doris Berzini is not with us any
I know,
longer,
I know, it's
can you
very
tell
lost.
us what the Payne Gentry house was like? Because I give tours through there.
It was a place where it had been a rooming house.
Really? A
Oh, yes,
rooming
a
house?
rooming house. Yes, they rented it out, and it had, I don't know how many layers of linoleum on the floors that had to be taken up, and it had a great huge grate in the one room, and they had one of those big huge furnaces with all the arms and stuff like that on down in the basement, and it was dirty. I cannot, and I'm saying that because I remember working there and coming home and having such a throat problem because of all the dust and stuff like that. And remembered one time out in the gazebo pulling little pieces of paper, newspapers that had been put in to hold it together, and they were ancient, really ancient old copies of the newspapers that were St. Louis newspapers at the time.
What was the furnace burning as fuel? Was it coal? Oil?
I can't tell you, but I'm gonna make a guess at oil, but I can't say that.
Was
All I
there
know
very
is
much
complicated.
furniture left in the house? Was there furniture up in the
Not
attic?
what
Did you go
call
up in the attic?
Original, I'd never gone in the attic, but they had found a duplicate, what was it, a piano?
Legs.
Yeah, and they were able to work something. There was wonderful things because Mrs. Syed had, and Mrs. Gentry was alive at that time, and they had access to a lot of the old trunks and a lot of things, and she was interested in seeing that the property, be preserved. And Mrs. Gentry was just a sweetheart of a lady, just the nicest person in the world. And they started off by giving the property, part of it, to the county. And then Bridgeton would take care of it. And then there was another section, and over the years they made it, and if I recall, there was an agreement, that Bridgeton was taken over. And that's how Bridgeton wound up with the Payne Gentry house. And but the politicians were not very eager to get on board because it didn't generate any revenue.
Right.
And so we just had terrible time trying to get that $40,000 just to get that roof on. Can I tell you one other story?
Sure,
I'm
sure.
going to tell you a story about the cocktail and grog party that we used to have every year. We came up with the cocktail and grog party over at the Carrollton Club. And Betty Lambert, whose husband was in advertising. She was going to be chair of the party, and at the time there was Earth City was trying to get up and going, and so there was a lot of conflict, and there was a big conflict between the mayor's election as to who was running. I think it was Hal Davis and Alf Stoll, if I recall right. And I sat at the meeting one night and I said, oh, why don't we just send invitations to all of these people and let's let all the politicians come? And I said, nothing they like better than pressing the flash. I said, they'll come, they'll pay to get in. I said, and we'll just, be a gathering place. Oh, some people say, we can't do that, Betty Lambert says, I will do it. So we sent out invitations, and we ran out of grog, we ran out of booze, we had a crowd you wouldn't believe. And it probably was about the same time the style was women wearing hot pants.
Oh, really?
And I can remember Alice Tote and Sue Leahy going around in hot pants selling raffle tickets. There was raffle tickets but I won one. It was an oil lamp, and I still have the oil lamp. But I can remember, that was part of that cocktail party that year. And we had hysteria. We had another time we were trying to raise money, and we went down to the Carrollton Shopping Center, and they let us set up outside on the sidewalk. And Doris went up to there was a florist on Lindbergh, and she came back on Saturday with some flowers that weren't going to last till Monday, and we were going to sell pots of flowers. And we had some old jewelry, and had some penny candy, and then we had a tent that we got from the what's the funeral home that's down
Colliers?
No, not Colliers.
The Alexander?
The Alexander, yeah, their tent that they use for funerals, and we had old, like a garage sale, I guess you would call it, old stuff. Because I remember who got my what was it called? So the Wonder Horse. I'm trying to remember what the first name. I should remember that, but it was a hobby horse.
Oh, okay.
That my brother had, and my kids had gone through, and I can remember the Colette and what was this, Tom Walsh, the Walshes. That they bought that for a pittance or something. But overnight, it was going to be like a 2-day thing, and the awning caught fire.
Oh,
Somebody must have found
no.
a match or something like that, and it was like, oh my gosh, But we were just. That's where I developed some of the closest friends that I've had over the years, between, meeting some of the people who were involved in the politics that we would go. Do you know that you live out here long enough to know that there used to be a mill tax?
A what?
A mill.
Oh, mill. Okay.
A mill tax. That's how they first got the monies for the park department.
Just 1/10 of a cent.
That's right. During the war years, I guess
They
they
had
had
actual
green and a
mills,
red.
yeah.
And one of those ladies who came to that coffee that I talked about was Leah Miller. She had been the campaign manager for Earl Davis, and she became the first. I think she was the first park commissioner. First chair of the park commission. So that goes back pretty far. But it's been interesting. I mean, it saddens me that there isn't that Carrollton development anymore.
Mm.
And because there were always kind of a little tug, back and forth about Carrollton being, we are Carrollton, and it's like we were like the poor relatives sitting over there, and who would have thought that it would be so decimated? And
Yes,
it
is.
saddens me.
It
But
is.
the thing that I thought of, and I'm going to get back to this because I found this to be, when I said at that meeting that I wanted to have churches and schools and health facilities and whatever it is.
Library.
And I sat there one day when they were talking about taking out Carrollton and putting up this runway, and I thought, Barbara, you got everything that you talked about that day. You've got DePaul Hospital, you've got the Bridgeton Trails Library, you've got the different grocery stores and stuff like that. There wasn't always, Carrollton didn't always have, do you remember JB's?
Oh, sure.
Okay, that wasn't always there.
Right.
And, yes, are you about done? You've run out?
We have less than a minute.
Okay. Do you
Thank
wanna
you
close
so
down?
much for talking with us
you're quite
today, and of
welcome.
course, we could go on and on,
I'm
but
sure.
we really appreciate your
Well, I
time
appreciate, I
today.
hope I haven't bored you.
No,
so
thank you.
Not by a
you're
long
quite
shot.
welcome.